This podcast is brought to you by the Empowerment Project. Research proves that empowerment self-defense training makes you safer, period. I want you to have a great self-defense toolkit so you can create strong boundaries, speak with confidence, and take up all the space that you deserve in the world. We'll hear stories from survivors and find out what worked for them and why. We'll interview leaders in the field and talk about tips, concepts, and really easy things that you could do to make yourself safer and interrupt the cycle of violence. I've taught self-defense classes for over 30 years, and I promise to teach you everything I know. Ultimately, I'm going to want you to get some in-person training, but a great empowerment self-defense class is more than just the physical skills. The list of things I want to teach you is endless, so let's get to it. My name is Sylvia Smart, and welcome to the Empowerment Project. My guest today, Clara Porter, is a one-of-a-kind human being. Luckily for me, she became one of my mentors as I worked my way through the Empowerment Self-Defense Instructor certification process with the National Women's Martial Arts Federation, also called the NWMAF. Clara was patient and kind, challenging, and honest. She holds her Master's of Social Work degree, and she's the Direction of Prevention, Action, Change in Maine. She's a nationally certified instructor in empowerment self-defense with the NWMAF herself, and she's also certified through the Center for Anti-Violence Education, and she's got well over 20 years of experience in the field. Clara has worked as an adjunct professor in the School of Social Work at the University of New England. She was the coordinator of interpersonal violence prevention at the University of Southern Maine, and she was the executive director at the Sexual Assault Support Services of Mid-Coast Maine before focusing full-time on prevention, action, change. Clara is certified in advanced trauma first aid and has an extensive experience working with organizations and people of all ages, including folks with physical, mental, emotional, and developmental challenges. I invited Clara to be a guest instructor at my self-defense teacher training program this past year, and she was an immediate hit. Clara is one of the kindest and warmest people you will meet. Healing trauma through empowerment self-defense training takes a special gift, and Clara's got it, and she shares it freely. She's here to share it with us today. Welcome, Clara Porter.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you.
It's great to be here with you. And I would love to start by asking you just to tell us a little bit about your journey. Like, what inspired you to get involved with the field of social work in the first place, and how did that cross paths with the whole empowerment self-defense movement, and how did those two things intertwine and come together for you? Big question, but tell us everything.
Yeah. Well, jobs in social work really grew out of my activism, which at the time was really around domestic violence and violence against women in general. And I started working in a safe house, is what we called them at the time, for women who were experiencing abuse from intimate partners, and just became really interested in that work. And social work itself, I think, is a very flexible field and degree. So I was always interested in equity and in really empowerment with women. And that then, really made the connection with empowerment self-defense when I became introduced to that. One thing that always made me uncomfortable with social work was some of the power issues. You're advocating for someone often rather than with someone. And, I could make a call and get someone a service or a benefit when if they called themselves that program or that institution wouldn't respect their voice.
Right.
So I was always uncomfortable with that dynamic. And so when I was introduced to empowerment self-defense in, I think it was 1994 or 5, that's what I really loved about it, that this is very horizontal, right? We all have our own experiences. We all have things to learn from each other and teach one another. And that was very attractive to me.
How did that come about? Like, did you take a self-defense class, or were you training martial arts and you started to learn about it, or did someone tell you about it, or how did that come about?
Yeah, I was actually at a street fair in Brooklyn where I lived at the time. And Brooklyn Women's Martial Arts had a table, and I saw a flyer for taking a women's karate class and took the class, fell in love with the place, the people, and the martial art, and started training there. And after a year, folks could then take their empowerment self-defense teacher training class. So I signed up for that, and then just started apprenticing with them and learning more about the system, and teaching and training for the next 6 years until I moved to Maine and was forced to start teaching on my own.
Because you loved it.
Yeah.
And by that time, had you already gotten your degree in social work, or was that all kind of happening at the same time, or how'd that go?
Yeah, I had been working in social work for quite a while before I moved to New York. And then I was actually in a master's in social work program when I started taking karate and was introduced to empowerment self-defense.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thanks. That helps us know a little bit of, your background. And then, we know that sexual assault and violence can cause a lot of harm, trauma. What's your understanding of this trauma and how people can experience it in their lives and their bodies? And how did you come to that understanding? Because you've got a really fascinating, I think, perspective on this that I'd love for my listeners to learn about from you.
Yeah. Thank you. It's, certainly I've learned about trauma just over the years of working in the domestic violence movement, and then in programs to prevent and respond to sexual assault specifically as well. Also from my own experience and my own journey in healing. And then, having the opportunity to take some more training myself, after the master's program. The training in trauma first aid was really excellent. And that unfortunately is no longer available, but it really exposed me to things that I knew but hadn't been able to express yet.
Mm-hmm.
That things like, trauma lives in the body, not in the incident or the experience. So you and I could have the same experience. We could witness or be in a fender bender, even with each other, and we might react to it completely differently based on, our biology, our history, even going back generations. All of those things impact how that experience is going to affect me. And I think the way it works in the body is really important to understand vis-a-vis why empowerment self-defense works,
right?
To help with healing, because those kind of events, particularly an event like a sexual assault, dysregulates our nervous system so much that we could get to a place where we're completely overwhelmed and our body will go into a freeze response, which is super smart, right, on our body's part. It's our body trying to take care of us.
Right.
But when you have that experience of going into freeze, sometimes your body won't then regulate itself after the fact. So you get that charge and your sympathetic nervous system charging, but your parasympathetic nervous system doesn't fully discharge. And so you're kind of stuck in this state of, arousal, activation. And you might experience a lot of situations where you dissociate or kind of check out for a while. And I think what can happen is that when we're really easily activated, or some people say triggered, you start to, fear that response, and you kind of make your life smaller so that you're less at risk of that happening. So you avoid situations or people or conversations or places even. And I think that's one of the impacts that's really among the most damaging to folks' lives.
Absolutely. Living in fear and pulling inward and narrowing and tightening and making smaller.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you said something interesting too, because a lot of times in my experience, people who have had sexual assault experiences in their lives and maybe experienced that freeze can see that as their body betraying them. And
Right.
what you just said was that this is one of the ways that our bodies actually protect ourselves. Could you just talk a little bit about that and dispel that?
Yeah, sure. We know that these are automatic responses, right? The fight, the flight, and then if neither of those is available, the overwhelm is such that we'll go into freeze. And freeze is like an animal, playing dead. The predator is no longer so interested, and that is a very smart strategy in nature to survive, to get through to the other side of an event. And, so we'll talk about that in class and just normalize things like this is normal. Your body did what it needed to do. And I think that can be, a huge aha for a lot of folks, because we spend a lot of time blaming ourselves, and society doesn't help with that, right? Because there's a lot of blame out there, all the questions, all the you should have. And I think that's one of the powerful things about empowerment self-defense is there are no shoulds, there's no always, and there are no nevers. It's your own experience, and how you choose to act in response is all good and all right always.
Right. And the way that you talk about freezing is taking that disempowered feeling of like, I didn't do anything. I just laid there and took it, and turning it into like an empowerment statement. Your body was doing what it needed to do in that moment to protect you, to keep you safe, to keep you alive.
Yeah.
So let's talk about empowerment and empowerment self-defense, because this goes hand in hand with this. Those of us who teach empowerment self-defense know, have seen, have experienced, have witnessed that this training can be incredibly healing for survivors. In particular, with this trauma, this withdrawal from life, or this fear about things that many of us have lived with. I can't go there. I can't do that. Oh, that's not going to work for me. I can't travel by myself. All the things I can't do because I'm afraid. And it takes these things and flips them on their head. So could you talk about this from your perspective as both a social worker and a self-defense instructor? What's your experience of this?
Sure. Yeah, I think empowerment self-defense is, well, it's powerful for, lots of different reasons. But one of them, I think, is how we start out. So in every class, the teacher, facilitators really work to create this container that's going to feel safer for participants, talking about confidentiality and having choice in everything you do. There's lots of ways to participate, and watching is one of them. Um, Trying to stay in your challenge zone where we learn the best, moving out of our comfort zone a little bit, but also knowing that we can step back when we need to, and talking about what self-care might look like. All of those things are designed to, let people and really give that agency to people to control what their experience is going to be. And particularly for survivors, having any kind of control and choice is huge, because that most of the time was taken away from them in the trauma they experienced. So I think that's the baseline that we all start out in with any class. And that's just super, super important. And I think then the other piece is that everything is rooted in the body. So, all of the pieces that we're teaching, whether it's a verbal skill, we're always reflecting back on, connecting the face, the voice, and the body language. We're checking in with how our body's feeling after every exercise. We're doing grounding and centering exercises and kind of sourcing those from the group. Like, what do people already do? We're noticing our body's reactions to things and talking about, okay, when I feel a charge, the energy rises to my upper body. So what can I do to get that back into the big muscles of my lower body? Those kinds of things. And just all of the movement, all of the boundary setting, where we can practice in sort of a progression of situations. So we have success with giving someone a gesture to stop when they're moving towards us. And then we progress to adding the voice to that and the facial expression, and then into scenarios. And having that experience of someone else listening to the boundary that we set without question,
Mm-hmm.
is pretty huge. And having that space to practice that stuff and not having the pressures of the quote unquote real situation in our workplace, but just being able to practice lots and lots of different scenarios and also experience all the ways that our bodies can generate power. That's a revelation to lots of people as well.
Right.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we've seen from pre and post surveys of folks who have taken our classes is that increase in confidence, an increase in feeling like I have the ability to navigate different situations with challenging people in my life, particularly the people, category that folks rate the highest is family members and intimate partners, but also, coworkers and people in the street and lots of situations like that. And I think that's important too, that we focus on what the data tells us the risks really are for most of the people. So, for women, and for actually most people in general, that's going to be people people in your own life, but also being pretty specific about, so what are the risks based on your variety of connecting identities, whether that's risks for LGBTQIA folks or people of color, all the range of looking at how do we respond to what the real risks are in our lives.
Exactly what you just said. And then I want to add in the catharsis of hitting stuff and yelling. When people think about self-defense, they oftentimes think about hitting things and taking people out and knocking them out and fighting and all the physical stuff, which is on the rarer end. However, in self-defense, empowerment self-defense classes, that can be a catharsis for people in a new way of experiencing their power as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And experiencing the power of the other people in the class too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
we'll often have people hold bags for one another. So not only am I experiencing my own power when you hold the bag for me, but I'm seeing your response, that you might have to step back, and your power in that you can hold that bag for me and kind of help me to practice, and then I help you to practice. It's a huge revelation, really, for lots of people, and being able to connect our energy. So if I'm striking with my hand, but my energy is connected all the way to my back foot, and having that connection and understanding the dynamics of creating power with my body is I think really transformative to a lot of people. We often also will end classes with board breaking. And I know that's a very martial arty kind of thing, but because it's an experience of focus rather than power, it's, a really an amazing experience that people take away with them from class.
I love that. Board breaking is incredibly fun too.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to mention also, you know what I love about what you just said, like experiencing other people in the class holding the bags for you or watching them and witnessing. That is such a huge part of an empowerment self-defense class where everyone's cheering for you and witnessing your power. And sometimes the most incredible breakthroughs happen when moms are watching their daughters or when daughters are watching their moms and they're like, oh my God.
Yep.
She's really strong. I didn't know that. And it's really exciting to watch that blossom.
That mutual respect.
Yeah.
Is really
so
huge.
Great.
I love those classes with parent-child classes where, young people in a group can present their thoughts and their ideas and their perspective in a way that a parent could really hear when they can't hear that from their individual child.
Right. Exactly.
And vice versa.
Yes.
So that's a really powerful experience for sure.
That's where your little social worker skills come in so handy. Hey, I wanted to, while we're talking about it, and I just feel like we can't talk about this enough. In my interview with Martha Thompson, we really spent some time on this, but I want to hear your perspective as well, which is the difference if a listener is looking for a self-defense class, what are some things that they could look for, and why would they want an empowerment self-defense class versus a self-defense class?
Yeah.
What's the difference, and how do they know?
I think asking questions of the programmer, of the instructors, is really the best way to find out what you need to know. Just like in any of our boundary setting, right? When we ask a question or we set a boundary, and how the person reacts to that gives us a lot of information about them. So asking questions like, how do you create a safer space for participants? If they don't have an answer for that, do not take the class.
Right.
Basically, this is so fundamental. Do I have choice in what I participate in or what I don't participate in? Again, fundamental. If you have a physical injury of some kind, like I have a knee that's weaker than the other knee, I would let them know that and say, so I have one knee that, is less able to handle, kicking or what have you than the other one. How is that going to work in this class? They, again, should have an answer for that. And an answer that basically that lets you know that it's your choice, that you can make decisions along the way, and that those decisions are the right ones for you. That there's not some rigid structure where you have to participate in a certain way. I think that's pretty fundamental for if you're taking a martial arts class or a self-defense class. Those are things that you really want to look for. I think those are really primary for me.
Yeah, that's great. I think also reading well the website and looking for instances of victim blaming or shaming, or also do's and don'ts, which I think we shy away from, like don't go into a dark alley at night, or, photos that are fearful.
Yeah, definitely check out their flyers and the images they use. Anything that's, designed to generate fear is not empowering. Right?
It's the opposite.
It is completely the opposite. And they're using that as a tool to get you in the door.
Yeah.
And that tells you a lot about how they might present the material as well.
Yeah.
I also look for a class, even if they don't call it empowerment self-defense, if it has an equal balance of verbal skills and physical skills, that's a good sign. If they're not just looking at street scenarios, but a range of scenarios, including in the home and in other situations with people that's a good sign as well. because they're listening to, what the data actually says about our real lives and what we've truly experienced.
Yeah. Awesome. So we know by virtue of data and statistics that a number of our listeners have experienced some sort of trauma. So I'd love to talk with you about practicalities, like specific ways listeners can grow their awareness about their trauma and heal from it. Taking an empowerment self-defense class is certainly one way. Therapy is another. Do you have some specific advice or cool tools or strategies listeners can use to center themselves, ground themselves, move through their trauma into their healing, or great books to read? Or
Yeah, I think whatever you already do to ground and center yourself in the moment when something's happening, just work to build on that. Because we all have tools, things that we do after the fact, but those are often not accessible to us, whether it's listen to music or take a walk or, whatever it is. In the moment, those tools are generally not accessible. So thinking about what you already do, what already helps. Some folks use deep breathing. That doesn't work for everyone, particularly for people who have experienced certain types of assault. But other pieces like checking, looking around the room to orient yourself and reorient yourself to the space to remind yourself that you're right here, right now is super important, particularly if you have the experience of kind of checking out or dissociating. Naming objects in the room can be very helpful. So I'll look around and notice the colors, 3 different colors in a room, and say them to myself. That can be a great tool for just getting back present. And actually, a participant in one of our classes gave me one that I think is super powerful, which is taking your thumb and touching each of your fingers on one hand in turn. So thumb to forefinger, middle, ring finger, pinky. And that can be even more powerful if you add words to it. So sometimes I'll say, I am okay. Or someone the other day added, I am right here to that. And something you can do, nobody sees you doing it. It's in your pocket, what have you. But that kind of thing, which activates the meridians in your body and also engages the front of your brain, the prefrontal cortex, so it brings you back out of that reptile brain, so that you're a little more present, a little more conscious. Breathing and doing something like that can be helpful. But really, anything that you can do to become more aware of what your body's doing and how it reacts to stress. So any of those things, like where does stress go in my body? Do I feel it in my chest or my shoulders or my jaw or my neck, my belly? We all have our own patterns. And once you start noticing that, try and learn some tools for getting that energy back into the big muscles of your body, into your thighs, your butt, lower in your body to contain it better is really helpful. And I think the other pieces are, when we think about verbal and how we can learn to take up more space in the world, we often talk about all the different verbal diminishers we may use in email or even in speech, saying things like, may I ask a question, or I just, or kind of, sort of, this
I'm
might
not really sure, but
yeah, exactly. And there are all these cushions around our central message. So I think that can be a good practice piece too, of starting to take some of those away, maybe starting an email and get it down to your core message, and just notice how people respond, and seeing and noticing that in other people too, because that's a common way of speaking these days, I think, is using all these cushion phrases.
That's a great way to put it, cushion phrases. And
which
yeah,
really can obscure our message,
yeah,
right?
they're
So,
diminishments.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And just one other thing, I think practicing where we want to set boundaries and express what we want, need, and feel in different situations. So whether it's with a yoga teacher who touches without asking during a class, coming in a little early and saying, I prefer that you don't touch me during class, or that I am okay with this touch, but not that touch. So, where are the points in our lives where we can set some boundaries and gain some clarity about what works for us and what doesn't?
That's so great. And starting with the ones that have less punch, that are a
Mhm.
little easier, and then build as we go.
Yeah, it's like working out, right? It's like developing muscles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I mean, I also want to just mention that sometimes we aren't even aware that our anxiety is ratcheting up, or that we're reliving an experience. It's just so unconscious.
Hmm.
And something that someone taught me one time was to, as an exercise, just set my alarm to go off randomly throughout the day. And when it goes off, I stop what I'm doing and I breathe and I check in with my body and just see what it's feeling and where. And that was really instrumental in helping me, first of all, just be aware. And
Hmm.
then all these tools are there to work with that.
Absolutely. And how your body reacts to the alarm.
Yeah, we're like, "Oh my god, what
Right.
time is it?"
Notice that. Yeah,
Notice
absolutely.
that.
Yeah.
Um, that was great. Thank you for all those ideas, and I really wanna talk, about your program. Your program is called Prevention, Action, Change. What
Hmm.
do you do? What is it, and what kinds of things do you teach?
Yeah, it is an empowerment self defense program. So every other class we do is based off of that. So we have lots of different formats for empowerment self defense training. And then the spin off trainings from those are active bystander intervention or de escalation, workplace safety. Um, Identity-based harassment and microaggressions. Lots of different programs that have spun off of this central core, and that still have their roots in empowerment self-defense. And the one of the biggest programs is our Healing Through Empowerment program, which is a 10-week empowerment self-defense course, which also has a lot more time and space around all of the training so that people can experience that in a slower pace, so that they're practicing that charge discharge in the nervous system. Um, and it has a lot more information about all, and to help normalize all the different ways that we respond to trauma and work to heal from it.
We're recording this during the pandemic, and though it's a challenging time, it also has given birth to some really cool opportunities. And when you and I were talking earlier, one of the cool things about your program, Prevention, Action, Change, is that you're on Zoom.
Yeah.
And so you live in Maine, but someone
Mhm.
who lives in Florida or California or Texas or Indiana can take your classes. And you were mentioning that probably even once the pandemic is over, you can see yourself embracing this way of teaching also.
Yeah, I think it'll always be a presence now. We did a recent class where we had someone from Albania and someone
Wow.
from Ireland and someone from California, along with a whole bunch of Mainers. So it's fascinating. And it also provides access to people for whom, even within Maine, travel is difficult. Um, Being in a room of people is challenging. That's going to be challenging for all of us, in the
Yeah.
opening days of recovery from the pandemic. But I think that it really provides a point of access that we haven't had until now.
It's opened up a whole new world.
It really has. It really has. It's a gift in many ways. I mean, I will really be happy when I can hold a bag for someone.
Oh, I know. And they can kick it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a great alternative and a tool in and of itself.
What do you love most about this work?
I really love both the aha moments that people experience and through whatever part, because sometimes the verbal is the most challenging for lots of folks. But those aha moments of revelation, of understanding are really powerful. And particularly when they're connected to self-blame. So, the best closing circle feedback I ever got on a class was when someone said, I no longer blame myself. And that's just huge and transformational,
That's great.
Yeah.
So how can people find you if they want to take your classes? Where do they go?
Yeah, we're on the web at www.pacmaine.com, P-A-C, Maine, M-A-I-N-E.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, etc.
You're everywhere.
Yeah. And we do, in more normal times, we do travel pretty extensively for classes and things. And we present at conferences. So we're kind of all over the place.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's been wonderful talking with you. We're kind of wrapping up, but is there anything that we didn't talk about or you feel like you still have stuff you want to say before we close?
I think that the only piece you brought up, the training online versus training in person. And one thing that we've learned is that you can receive that same benefit of feeling a greater connection with your body and feeling safer in your body when you're training online as you can in person. I mean, the pre and post tests that we've been doing show that. And so, really don't hesitate to take a class online. It has a lot to offer, and it doesn't always have to be in person.
That's so great. On that note, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia.
Thanks for hanging. Thanks for chatting. And go find Clara and take some classes with PacMaine. Is it .com or .org?
It's .com.
It's affirmation time. This is how I end every self-defense class. It's kind of cheesy, but it's very cool, and this is how it works. We're going to do like a little call and response. If you can say this out loud, if you can repeat after me, do it, because it's important, I think, for you to hear your own voice. But if you can't, like if you're on a crowded subway or someplace where it's embarrassing, don't worry. You can also just say it inside your head. Okay? So I'm going to say something and you're going to repeat it after me. I'm going to give you space to do that. And at the end, we're going to say yes. Here we go. Repeat after me. I am worth protecting. I love myself. I belong. I deserve to take up space on planet Earth. I am a strong and powerful person. Yes! Woohoo! And hey, as a wrap-up, will you do me a favor? Will you do all the things that you do when there's a podcast? Like, will you tell your friends? Will you subscribe? Will you come back each week, communicate with me, review this podcast? Like, all those things to help get more bandwidth, help more people find out about it. That would be super awesome. Take a deep breath. You are amazing. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.